The desert stretched endlessly under the burning Arizona sun. The wind carried a dry, heavy silence, broken only by the sound of a wagon wheel creaking slowly along the rocky trail. Martha Reynolds sat at the front of the wagon, holding the reins tightly in her tired hands. Her horse moved at a slow pace, its sides shining with sweat. She had been traveling since dawn, and now as the afternoon light shimmered across the sand, she began to feel the weight of the journey pressing on her shoulders. Martha was not a woman easily frightened. She had crossed rivers, storms, and lonely roads before. Life on the frontier had hardened her spirit, but it had also given her a kind heart. She was traveling alone that week, heading from her small homestead near Fort Bowie to a settlement about 40 miles away. Her husband had passed 2 years earlier, and since then she had learned to depend only on herself. Her trip was meant to be short. She needed medicine, some tools, and mail from her sister in Texas. But as she moved deeper into Apache land, she felt the stillness of the desert change. It was too quiet, too empty, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The sun was lowering in the sky when her horse suddenly stopped. Martha frowned and gave the reins a light pull, but the animal refused to move. Its ears twitched nervously. Then she saw it, a shape lying by the side of the dry riverbed, half covered in dust and weeds. At first she thought it might be a dead animal. Curiosity mixed with worry made her climb down from the wagon. The heat hit her like a wave as she stepped closer. When she knelt beside the small figure, her heart skipped a beat. It was a child. The boy couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. His skin was darkened by the sun, his face covered in dirt, and his small chest rose weakly with each breath. He was wearing torn clothes made of soft leather, the kind worn by Apache families who lived beyond the hills. His lips were dry and cracked, and his tiny hands trembled. Martha felt a rush of fear and compassion at the same time. She had heard many stories about settlers who were attacked when they interfered with Apache matters. Yet looking at the child, half buried in dust, she couldn't walk away. She looked around the empty desert, half expecting to see someone hiding among the rocks. But there was no one, only the wind whispering through the dry grass. She knelt again, gently touching the boy's forehead. It burned with fever. A small wound on his arm looked old but not deadly. It was clear that he was dying not from the injury but from hunger and thirst. Martha's mind raced. If she helped him, she might anger his people. If she left him, she would live with the memory forever. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a quiet prayer under her breath. When she opened them again, she knew what she had to do. Carefully, she lifted the boy into her arms. He was so light it broke her heart. She carried him to the wagon and laid him on a blanket in the back. Her horse snorted uneasily, sensing her tension. Martha took a small metal canteen from her supplies and poured a few drops of water onto the boy's lips. He stirred faintly, whispering a word she couldn't understand. She smiled softly and said, "You're safe now, little one. I'll take care of you." As she climbed back onto the wagon seat and started moving again, her eyes kept shifting to the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the desert sky in red and gold. Shadows stretched long and thin across the sand. Martha's heart pounded. Every sound, every rustle, felt like footsteps coming closer. She had no idea how far Apache scouts might be, but she couldn't leave the child. She kept going, guiding her horse toward the small canyon where she knew there was a spring nearby. It was a place she had rested before, hidden between tall rocks and low trees. By the time night fell, the stars had covered the sky like cold, distant fires. The air had turned cool, but the fear in her chest kept her warm. She built a small campfire and placed the boy near it, wrapping him in her shawl. His breathing was weak but steady. Martha took out a bit of bread, crushed it with water, and tried to feed him. He swallowed a few sips and drifted into sleep. She sat beside him for hours, staring into the flames, listening to the strange quiet of the desert night. Her thoughts wandered. She remembered her own son, the child she had lost years ago to a fever before they moved west. He would have been about the same age as this boy. That memory filled her eyes with tears. She hadn't allowed herself to cry in a long time. She wiped them quickly away, whispering, "Maybe God sent you to me, little one. Maybe this time I can save you." The next morning, she awoke to a soft sound. The boy was trying to sit up. His dark eyes looked confused, frightened, but alive. Martha smiled and spoke gently, even though she knew he didn't understand English. She gave him water, then pointed to herself and said, "Martha." The boy blinked, then whispered something in his language, a name perhaps. He touched his chest and repeated it. Taji. She nodded. Taji, she said softly, trying to make him feel calm. The boy managed a faint smile before lying back again. For the rest of the morning, Martha cleaned his wound using the little medicine she carried. She talked to him as she worked, her voice calm and kind. Though he couldn't understand her words, her tone comforted him. She knew she would have to keep him hidden until he recovered enough to travel, but she also knew the truth. Apache warriors would come looking for him. When they did, they would not care that she had saved him. They would only see a white woman with one of their children. Still, she couldn't turn away. Every time she looked at the boy, she saw life returning to him. She fed him small portions, helped him drink, and kept the fire going through the night. Each sunrise brought both relief and dread. On the second evening, she climbed to a rock ledge overlooking the valley. In the distance, she thought she saw faint fires flickering. Maybe campfires, or maybe just her imagination. Her stomach tightened. If they were Apache search parties, it was only a matter of time before they reached her. That night, she barely slept. She sat near the boy, watching him breathe. He seemed peaceful, unaware of the danger surrounding them. Martha whispered stories from her past just to fill the silence. Tales about her home in Kansas, about how she learned to ride, about her mother's garden that used to bloom in spring. Talking helped her feel less alone, as if the desert was listening too. When the dawn came again, she decided they had to move. She packed her few things, gave Taji a sip of water, and lifted him gently into the wagon. Her plan was to reach her cabin before the sun went down, a long, tiring journey, but the only safe place she knew. As the horse started moving, the sky turned bright gold again. The boy rested quietly in the back, wrapped in her shawl. The road stretched ahead, lonely and uncertain, but Martha felt a strange calm inside her. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she would face danger or understanding. But she knew one thing for sure. She had done what her heart told her to do. And as the wagon disappeared into the desert's golden light, the woman who had always traveled alone carried not just a child, but a fragile hope that kindness could survive even in the harshest of places. The journey back to Martha's small cabin was long and slow. The road was rough, filled with dry stones and deep cracks where rain once ran through. The wheels of her wagon creaked, and the horse's steps grew heavier with every mile. The desert sun climbed high again, sharp and white, making the air shimmer like glass. Martha's lips were dry, her throat sore, but she refused to stop. Every now and then she turned around to check on the child lying in the back. The boy, Taji, was still weak but awake. His eyes followed the moving sky, blinking against the bright light. Martha spoke softly as she rode. "We'll be home soon, little one," she said, though she knew he didn't understand. Her voice was gentle, like a mother talking to calm her child. She told him stories about her cabin, how the wind sang through the tall pines nearby, how a stream ran behind the house, and how sometimes wildflowers grew after rain. Talking helped her forget her fear. It made the silence less heavy. By the time the sun began to fall behind the red hills, Martha saw the small cabin appear in the distance, a tiny shape of safety in a world of dust and danger. Her heart lifted a little. The horse neighed softly, as if it too was relieved to see home again. When they reached the door, she climbed down slowly, her muscles stiff from the long ride. She carried the boy inside and placed him gently on her bed. The cabin was small but warm. It smelled of pine wood and dried herbs she kept for medicine. She lit a lantern, its golden light filling the room. The boy looked around with tired eyes, unsure of where he was. Martha smiled and said softly, "You're safe here, Taji." She poured some clean water into a cup and offered it to him. He hesitated for a moment, then took it with both hands, drinking greedily. When he finished, he looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time there was a spark of trust in his gaze. Martha felt it too, a small connection that went beyond words. Over the next few days, life in the cabin settled into a gentle rhythm. Each morning, Martha boiled water, made soft porridge, and helped Taji sit up to eat. His strength slowly returned, though his body was still thin and weak. She cleaned his wound carefully, changing the cloth and applying a salve she had made from plants. Sometimes he winced in pain, but he didn't pull away. He had learned to trust her hands. At first, their communication was difficult. Martha spoke in English, and Taji only knew a few words in his own language. But kindness needed no translation. When he pointed to things, she said their English names and cup. bread, water, and he would repeat them in his quiet voice. Sometimes he laughed when she mispronounced a word he said in Apache. Those little moments made the cabin feel alive again. For the first time in years, Martha heard laughter inside her home. Yet deep inside her, fear still lived quietly. Every evening as the sun sank below the horizon, she would step outside and scan the distant ridges. The desert was calm, but she knew better. Apache scouts could be out there, watching silently from the hills, tracking the faint trail her wagon had left behind. She knew they would come, not with words but with weapons, demanding to know why one of their children was in her care. Each night, she prayed for understanding, for peace, and for the boy's full recovery before that day arrived. She knew she could not hide him forever. The thought of what might happen filled her chest with a cold ache, but she could not send him away. Not yet. On the 5th day, Taji could walk a few steps. He followed Martha outside, blinking at the sunlight as if seeing the world anew. The breeze touched his face and he smiled, a soft, shy smile that made Martha's heart warm. She showed him the small garden beside her cabin. The plants were dry from the heat, but a few green leaves still pushed through. She handed him a small tin cup and showed him how to pour water around the roots. He watched carefully and copied her, serious and focused. They worked together until the sun grew too hot. Then they sat in the shade, sharing a few pieces of bread and dried fruit. Though no words passed between them, something deeper did. The quiet bond of two souls who had found safety in each other. But that same evening, as the sky turned crimson and shadows stretched across the land, Martha noticed something that made her heart race. From the ridge far to the east, a thin line of smoke rose into the sky. It was distant, faint, but unmistakable, a signal fire. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed a log on her own fire. She didn't tell Taji what she had seen. The boy was sitting near the door, carving a small stick with a knife she had given him. He looked peaceful, happy. She couldn't break that peace, not yet. That night, sleep did not come easily. The desert outside felt too quiet, the silence too thick. The moonlight painted pale patterns across the wooden floor. Martha sat by the window, clutching the turquoise cross that hung around her neck, a gift from her mother long ago. She whispered a prayer not for herself but for the boy sleeping in her bed. She knew the coming days would test everything, her courage, her faith, and perhaps even her life. Morning came soft and golden. Taji woke early and went outside to feed the chickens. Martha smiled as she watched him move carefully among them, his small hands spreading grain with care. The sight filled her with both joy and sadness. He had started to feel at home. He trusted her completely now. But she could not shake the feeling that time was running out. Later that afternoon, she decided to visit the spring behind the hill to fetch more water. The boy wanted to come, so she took his hand and they walked together along the narrow path. The wind whispered through the dry brush and small lizards darted across their feet. When they reached the spring, Martha knelt and filled her buckets while Taji played nearby, throwing pebbles into the clear water. The sunlight sparkled on the surface, turning it gold. For a few precious moments, she allowed herself to believe that maybe everything would be fine, that maybe the Apache would not come after all. But as they started walking back, she froze. A faint sound reached her ears, a rhythm like distant thunder, steady and growing stronger, hoofbeats. She turned toward the open desert and saw small figures moving far away, like dots in the sunlight. Riders, many riders. Her breath caught. She grabbed Taji's hand and they hurried back to the cabin. Inside, she closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. The boy looked at her, confused by her sudden fear. She forced a smile and said softly, "It's all right." But her voice trembled. Through the small window, she could see dust rising in the distance, a storm of men on horseback heading in her direction. That evening, she sat with the boy near the fire, pretending everything was normal. She read aloud from an old book, her voice steady though her hands shook slightly. The boy rested his head on her shoulder and closed his eyes, trusting her completely. Outside, the desert was silent again, but Martha knew that silence meant they were closer. When she finally lay down to rest, sleep refused to come. She stared at the wooden roof above her, her thoughts heavy. She had chosen kindness over fear, life over safety. She had saved a child, but in doing so, she had brought danger to her door. Yet deep down, she knew she would not change a single thing. No matter what came, she had done what was right. As the night passed and the first light of dawn touched the desert floor, Martha stood by the window again. The horizon shimmered with golden dust. In that rising light she could see them now. Riders moving fast, hundreds of them spreading across the plain like a wave. She knew then that her waiting was over. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder as the sun climbed higher into the sky. Dust swirled across the plain, rising like smoke behind the fast-moving riders. Martha stood by the small window of her cabin, her hands pressed tightly against the wood. She could see them now, a long line of Apache warriors on horseback, their figures growing larger with every passing second. The desert air carried the rhythm of their approach, steady and heavy, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Her breath came slowly, deep and careful. She had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, her body trembled. She turned toward the boy. Taji was standing near the table, his eyes wide, watching her. He could sense the tension. Martha walked over, knelt beside him, and placed both hands on his shoulders. "Listen, Taji," she said softly, even though he couldn't understand all her words. "Whatever happens, stay behind me. Don't be afraid." Outside, the horses slowed and began to spread in a wide circle around the cabin. There were so many that the ground itself seemed to move. Martha counted quickly. There must have been close to 200 of them, warriors with bows, rifles, and spears. Their faces were painted, their eyes sharp and watchful. They moved like a living storm, silent except for the sound of hooves and the creak of leather. At the front of the group rode a tall man with a long braid and a scar running across his cheek. He wore a necklace of bones and turquoise. His eyes were dark and steady as he raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. The desert fell silent. Only the soft snorting of horses broke the stillness. Martha swallowed hard and pushed the door open. The bright sunlight hit her face as she stepped outside. Her hands were shaking, but she held them up to show she carried no weapon. The boy followed her, clutching the edge of her dress. The warriors stared at them, their expressions unreadable. For a moment, no one moved. The leader dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the sand. He walked toward her with calm, deliberate steps, his eyes never leaving her face. Another man followed him, younger, dressed differently. He carried a small bag across his chest and held himself with quiet respect. Martha guessed he was the interpreter. The leader stopped a few steps away. His voice came deep and commanding as he spoke in his native language. The interpreter turned to Martha and said in broken English, "The chief asks, why the white woman has the Apache child?" Martha took a breath and tried to keep her voice steady. "I found him," she said softly. "He was dying in the desert. I gave him water. I cared for him. I did not mean harm." The interpreter translated her words. A low murmur ran through the warriors. Some looked at each other. Others kept their eyes fixed on her. The chief's face did not change. He said something short and firm. The interpreter turned back to her. "He says you took the boy from his people." Martha shook her head quickly. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "He was alone, hurt. I only saved him." "You can take him home. He belongs with you." She placed her hand gently on Taji's head. The boy looked up at her, confused but calm. Then he turned toward the chief, his small hand still holding onto Martha's dress. The boy stepped forward, wobbling a little on his weak legs. He spoke in Apache, his voice soft but clear. The chief listened, his eyes narrowing slightly. The boy continued, his tone filled with emotion. When he finished, the chief's face changed. His gaze softened for the first time. He looked from the boy to Martha, studying her carefully as if trying to see the truth in her eyes. The silence stretched between them. The warriors waited, tense and ready, watching every movement. Martha could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Finally, the chief spoke again. The interpreter hesitated before translating. "The boy says you gave him life again," he said quietly. "He says you gave him water when he was dying. He says you are..." "Good." Martha felt a wave of relief, but she didn't move. "I only did what anyone should do," she said softly. "He was just a child." The chief nodded slowly. He took a few steps closer until he stood only an arm's length away. Martha could see the deep lines on his face, marks of years under the desert sun. He looked strong, but his eyes carried sadness. He spoke again, this time in a gentler voice. The interpreter said, "The boy's father was killed. His mother died too. The boy wandered alone. You found him before the spirits took him." Martha's throat tightened. She felt tears sting her eyes but held them back. "I am sorry for your loss," she said. I didn't know. I only wanted to help. The chief nodded once more. Then in a slow, deliberate motion, he removed the weapon from his belt and placed it on the ground between them. The sound of it hitting the sand was quiet but powerful. The warriors behind him murmured again, but none moved. Martha understood what it meant. He was showing trust, not anger. The chief spoke once more, and the interpreter said, "He thanks you. He says few would help a stranger's child in this land. You have honor." Martha exhaled deeply, a tear finally rolling down her cheek. "You don't owe me thanks," she said, her voice breaking. "Just take him home." But to her surprise, the chief didn't move right away. He turned toward the boy and said something softly. The child's eyes filled with tears. He looked at Martha, then at the chief and back again. He ran to Martha and threw his small arms around her waist. She froze for a moment, then knelt and hugged him tightly. The world seemed to fall silent again. Only the sound of the wind moving through the grass remained. After a long pause, the boy stepped back. The chief motioned for 2 riders to come forward. They dismounted, and one wrapped a soft blanket around the child's shoulders. The boy turned once more toward Martha. His eyes said what his words could not: gratitude, love, and sadness all at once. Martha smiled through her tears and whispered, "Be brave, little one." The chief walked toward his horse, but before he climbed on, he turned back to Martha. He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small piece of turquoise carved in the shape of a stone tear. He walked back and placed it in her hand. His expression was calm but deep. Through the interpreter, he said, "This is for protection. You are now a friend to the Apache. Wherever our fires burn, you will not be harmed." Martha looked down at the stone, its blue surface shining in the sunlight. She held it tightly, unable to speak. The chief nodded to her once more and mounted his horse. He gave a signal, and slowly the line of warriors began to move. The ground trembled as the horses started away, their dust rising into the sky. Martha watched them until they became distant shapes against the horizon. The boy sat on one of the horses, wrapped in his blanket. Before they disappeared completely, he turned and raised his small hand in farewell. Martha stood there long after they were gone. The desert was quiet again, empty except for the wind and the sound of her horse stamping the ground nearby. She looked down at the turquoise stone in her palm, its color bright against the dust. Her heart felt heavy but peaceful. She had faced what she feared most, and had found grace instead of hatred. When she finally went back inside, the cabin felt strangely empty. The blanket the boy had used still lay across the bed, and his small footprints marked the floor. Martha sat down, holding the turquoise close to her heart. The world outside was vast and uncertain, but in that small space of time, 2 worlds had met, and had chosen understanding instead of anger. As the sun set and the last light faded from the hills, Martha whispered softly, "Thank you, God, for letting me find him." And in the quiet that followed, she could almost hear the distant echo of horses fading into the night, carrying away the child she had saved, and a piece of her heart along with him. The desert was quiet once again, but Martha could feel that the events of the day had left a permanent mark on her life. She sat by the small fire in her cabin, the turquoise stone clutched tightly in her hand. Its smooth surface seemed to glow faintly in the lantern light, a reminder of what had just happened. The memory of the boy's small hand in hers and the chief's calm, commanding eyes stayed with her. She had never expected that helping a child could change the way 2 worlds saw each other. But now she understood. Sometimes courage and kindness spoke louder than weapons or words. For the rest of that evening, Martha moved slowly around the cabin, performing her usual chores but with a mind full of thoughts. She filled the water pitcher, stacked firewood, and arranged a few dishes, all while replaying every moment from the confrontation in her head. She remembered the first time the chief had approached her, the steady look in his eyes and the silence that had stretched between them. She could feel the weight of that silence even now, heavy but not frightening, as if it had held something sacred. Martha thought about Taji, the small Apache boy who had unknowingly taught her so much about trust and bravery. She remembered the way he had stepped forward to speak to the chief despite his fear. His courage had saved both of them from misunderstanding. Martha smiled softly, remembering the first time he had smiled at her shyly when he tasted food she had prepared for him. Even now, the memory brought tears to her eyes. As the night deepened, she sat near the window, looking out at the desert under the silver light of the moon. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying faint scents of sage and sand. She thought about the chief and his warriors, and how close they had been to anger and violence. She realized that she had faced a moment in her life when one wrong step could have cost her everything. Yet instead of hostility, she had encountered understanding and respect. It was a lesson that she would carry forever. Her thoughts returned to the chief's words and the turquoise stone. He had spoken without anger, without accusation. His gestures had been deliberate, showing that he was judging not just her actions but her heart. Martha understood then that true respect was not earned by force, but by deeds that reflected honesty and care. She felt a deep gratitude for being allowed to witness such integrity. The fire crackled beside her as she prepared a small meal for herself. She could feel the emptiness in the cabin now, but it was not painful. It was quiet, reflective. She realized that life often asked for courage in the most unexpected ways. Saving a child in the desert, facing hundreds of warriors, and standing firm in truth had been far beyond what she thought herself capable of. And yet, she had done it. Martha thought about the Apache people and their lives in the desert. She wondered how they survived in such harsh conditions, how they raised children with strength and skill, and how their values had been passed from generation to generation. She felt a growing respect for them, a respect that went beyond what she had ever felt for anyone. She realized that understanding another's life and culture required patience, humility, and an open heart. As dawn approached, Martha prepared for a new day. She swept the floor, gathered water, and arranged a small basket of bread and dried fruit. She thought about what she would do if the warriors returned. Though they had left peacefully, she knew that the bond between her and Taji had created a responsibility to continue showing respect and care for the lives she touched. She felt ready, no longer fearful, only mindful of her role in this small, significant moment of history. The sun rose slowly, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Martha stepped outside to let the air fill her lungs. The wind brushed her hair and carried the distant sounds of birds, returning life to the land after the long night. She knelt to touch the sand, feeling the earth beneath her hands. It had been harsh, unyielding, yet it had also given her a chance to act with courage and kindness. Martha smiled, feeling a sense of peace she had not known before. Later that morning, she walked toward the small stream behind her cabin, carrying a bucket of water. She thought of Taji and imagined him learning the ways of his people, growing stronger every day. She pictured him running freely, laughing, safe among his own family. Her heart swelled with a quiet joy, knowing that her actions had allowed him to live and thrive. She felt proud, not of herself, but of the life she had preserved. Martha's thoughts wandered back to the turquoise stone. She traced its smooth edges with her fingers, remembering the chief's gesture. It was more than a gift. It was a symbol of trust, a sign that good deeds could bridge worlds. She placed it around her neck and touched it gently, as if drawing courage and guidance from its presence. She knew that the memory of this day would remain with her forever, guiding her in ways both big and small. The days that followed passed quietly. Martha continued her daily chores, tended to her cabin, and cared for her animals. Though the desert remained harsh and lonely, her heart felt lighter. She carried with her a newfound understanding of humanity, that even in the face of fear and danger, compassion and honesty could create harmony. She often thought of the chief and the warriors, imagining them riding back through the desert, carrying Taji safely home. She hoped that they would remember her as she remembered them, with respect and gratitude. Martha felt a deep connection to their world, a connection that went beyond distance, culture, or language. It was a connection of shared humanity, of life preserved through courage and care. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky with streaks of pink and orange, Martha sat outside her cabin. The wind carried a soft hush through the desert, and she felt the presence of something greater than herself. She realized that life often asked for difficult choices, moments when fear and duty collided, but she also knew that by acting with integrity and compassion, one could create meaning and leave a lasting impact. The turquoise stone gleamed softly in the fading light. Martha touched it again, feeling the smooth surface and the warmth it seemed to carry. She whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not just for the child she had saved, but for the lesson she had learned, as that courage, honesty, and kindness could conquer even the most daunting challenges. As night fell, The desert became a sea of shadows and stars. Martha looked up at the sky, the same sky she had traveled under when she first found the child in the desert. The journey had changed her. She had faced fear, risked her life, and discovered a strength she had never known. More than that, she had witnessed the power of trust and respect, and how even a single act of compassion could touch many lives. Martha went inside and sat by the fire, letting the warmth fill her tired body. She thought of Taji, safe now, and of the chief, whose honor and wisdom had left an indelible mark on her heart. She felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. The desert, harsh as it was, had shown her the beauty of human kindness and courage. Before she went to sleep, Martha carefully placed the turquoise stone on her nightstand. It was a reminder of what had happened, of the child she had saved, and the trust she had earned. It was a reminder that even in a world filled with uncertainty and danger, goodness could prevail. And as she closed her eyes, she felt certain that the bond she had formed, however brief, would remain in her heart forever, guiding her through the rest of her life. The desert was quiet in the early morning, painted in soft shades of pink and gold. Martha Reynolds stood outside her cabin, feeling the warmth of the rising sun on her face. The wind moved gently through the sparse trees and grasses, carrying the scent of sage and sand. Though the desert looked calm, Martha knew that life here was never easy. Yet in the stillness she felt a deep sense of peace. The events of the past days had changed her forever, leaving lessons she could carry for the rest of her life. She thought often about Taji, the small Apache boy she had saved in the desert. She imagined him now, running freely among his people, learning the ways of his family and growing stronger each day. The memory of his small hand in hers, the trust he had shown her, and the courage he had displayed before the chief filled her heart with quiet joy. She knew that the child's life had been saved not by luck alone, but by her choice to act with kindness, when fear might have made her turn away. Life returned slowly to her cabin. After that confrontation, Martha continued with her daily chores, feeding her animals, tending the small garden, and maintaining the modest home she had built with her own hands. Yet every time she passed the spot where the boy had slept, or the small fire they had shared, she felt the echo of something larger than herself. The turquoise stone that the chief had given her lay on her dresser, catching the sunlight each morning. She often picked it up, turning it over in her hands and remembering the words and gestures of gratitude she had received. The stone was more than a gift. It was a symbol of trust, understanding, and the power of human kindness. Martha realized that true courage was not in fighting or in anger, but in facing difficult situations with honesty and compassion. She had risked her own safety to save a life, and in doing so she had earned the respect of people from a world that had seemed distant and mysterious. The chief's gesture and the warrior's acceptance were proof that even the smallest actions could create profound connections. Though the desert could be lonely, Martha never felt entirely alone after that day. She carried the memory of the boy and the warriors with her in every step. When she traveled to nearby settlements, she spoke quietly of her experience not as a boast but as a lesson in kindness. People listened, surprised at her courage, but she always reminded them that any act of help, no matter how small, could change lives. As the years passed, Martha continued to live quietly in her cabin. She grew older, but the memory of Taji and the Apache warriors remained vivid. She would sometimes walk to the hills where she had first found the child and look across the desert, imagining the boy's laughter and the sound of horses riding through the plains. She felt a deep connection to the land, a bond strengthened by the choices she had made and the courage she had found within herself. Visitors occasionally came to Martha's cabin, settlers who had heard the story, or travelers who had passed through the desert. They were curious about the woman who had faced hundreds of warriors and survived, and they listened in awe as she recounted the events. Yet Martha never exaggerated, never added drama. She spoke simply, letting the truth of her actions shine. Her words carried the weight of honesty, and everyone who heard her felt the quiet strength in her spirit. The turquoise stone remained her constant companion. She wore it around her neck or kept it on her dresser, a reminder that her life had intersected with another in a meaningful and lasting way. It reminded her that acts of kindness and courage left marks far beyond what one could see. It reminded her that even in harsh, unforgiving places, humanity could shine brightly. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, Martha walked outside and looked across the desert. The sky was painted with brilliant shades of orange and red. She thought of the chief and the warriors riding home with the boy, their figures disappearing into the horizon. She wondered how Taji was growing, what lessons he was learning from his people, and whether he remembered the woman who had saved him when he was weak and alone. The thought filled her with quiet happiness and pride. Though the child had returned to his family, he had left an indelible mark on her life. Martha often reflected on the choices she had made, choosing compassion over fear, life over safety, and the consequences of those choices. She understood that bravery did not always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it was found in quiet decisions made in moments of uncertainty, and she knew that the kindness she had shown had rippled outward, creating a lasting bond between her world and the world of the Apache. Years later, when settlers spoke of Martha Reynolds, they called her the woman the Apache protected. It was a story that passed quietly through communities, a tale of courage, humanity, and the power of doing what is right. Martha never sought recognition, but she accepted the small gestures of respect and gratitude from those who knew her story. She understood that the true reward had already been given, in the life she had saved, the trust she had earned, and the lessons she had learned. Even in her old age, Martha carried the memory of the desert, the boy, and the warriors with her. She walked among the hills, feeling the sun on her face, the wind on her skin, and the earth beneath her feet. She remembered every detail: the heat of the sun, the dust rising from the plains, the rhythm of hooves, and the trust in a small boy's eyes. These memories were not painful. They were powerful, teaching her that even in the harshest environments, courage and compassion could create lasting change. Martha often thought about the lessons the desert had taught her. Life was unpredictable, full of challenges and dangers, but it was also filled with opportunities to make a difference. One could face fear and survive, create understanding where there was none, and leave a mark that endured. She knew that her actions had shown this truth, and that the small choices she had made could inspire others to act with similar courage and kindness. The turquoise stone remained the symbol of that truth. It was smooth, cool to the touch, and beautiful in its simplicity. Every time she held it, Martha felt the presence of the boy and the chief, a reminder that actions rooted in honesty and compassion could bridge worlds, heal pain, and create lasting trust. She smiled each time she touched it, remembering the courage that had allowed her to act, the life she had preserved, and the bond that had been formed. As the years passed, Martha's story became legend in the small settlements around the desert. Parents told their children about the woman who had saved a child in the harsh Arizona wilderness. Travelers who passed through the desert spoke of her courage and her wisdom. Yet for Martha, the story was not about recognition or fame. It was about the quiet understanding that one life could be changed, that one act of kindness could leave a ripple across time and place, and so Martha lived her days quietly, with the turquoise stone close to her heart, surrounded by the memories of courage, compassion, and humanity. The boy she had saved became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in a world of danger and fear, there was room for trust, respect, and love. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, had given her a profound gift: the knowledge that one person's courage could save a life, inspire others, and create bonds that would last a lifetime. In the quiet evenings, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the desert was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Martha would sit outside and watch the sky. She would think of the boy, of the chief, and of the warriors riding through the plains. She felt a deep peace in knowing that what she had done mattered, that her courage and kindness had left a mark not only on a life but on the hearts of many. And as the stars emerged, scattered across the dark velvet of the night sky, Martha smiled. She had faced fear, acted with integrity, and witnessed the beauty of human trust. She had saved a life, and in doing so had gained something greater: a story of hope, of courage, and of the enduring power of compassion. It was a story she carried in her heart forever, a story that would live on long after she was gone, a quiet reminder that even in the harshest deserts of life, kindness could prevail.